Shut up and hand over all company property. That's what she screamed, like we were in a hostage negotiation instead of the second-floor break room next to the vending machines and a chafing dish of lukewarm scrambled eggs. Half the staff still had syrup on their mouths from the team appreciation waffles when the founder's mother, Linda, slammed her bony little fist on the card table and fired me in front of everyone. No warning, no discussion, just decaf, disposable plates, and a public execution in front of interns who still had name tags clipped to their belt loops. She didn't even look at me when she said it, just stared past me, like I was a fogged-up mirror she was done wiping. "You're bloated overhead," she added, nose wrinkled like someone just farted confidence into her personal space. I stood there, still holding a Dixie cup of orange juice, while her voice echoed off the stained acoustic tiles. And that's when I realized something. I didn't feel rage, or heartbreak, or confusion. I felt relief, because I'd spent 19 years building this place like a haunted dollhouse, every bolt cataloged, every contractor vetted, every lease printed in triplicate and paper-clipped by color. And now the family matriarch, who once asked if Ethernet was a type of yogurt, had decided she could run the ship. Cute. So I smiled, quietly, took a napkin, wiped my fingers, walked over to the folding table where she stood, and gently laid down my badge like it was a prayer card at a funeral. Then I asked one question. Not loud, not dramatic, just clear enough to cut the silence in half. Then why did 4 lease payments go to Stone Lake Holdings LLC? The chewing stopped. Forks froze midair. You ever watch a fire alarm blink before it goes off? That's what her face did. Her mouth twitched like she was about to laugh, but then the meaning unwrapped itself behind her eyes, and she blinked. Twice. Now, before we go any further, I know most of you listening don't hit that subscribe button. That's fine. But if this kind of corporate soap opera keeps your coffee break interesting, go ahead and tap subscribe and like the video. Really motivates the team. Plus, the more people we reach, the more Karens we dethrone. Win-win. Anyway, Linda, bless her Botox-blitzed heart, tried to recover. She looked down at a legal pad, like maybe the answer was scribbled there between a muffin recipe and a list of people who still returned her calls. But I didn't wait around for the light bulb. I just turned, grabbed my bag, and walked out. Calm as a coma. On my way out, I passed Craig from finance. He looked like someone had just whispered a war crime into his ear. I winked and said, "Check the routing numbers." Security didn't stop me. They watched me like I had a pipe bomb in my purse, but no one dared touch me. I was already halfway down the hall when my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah in HR. What was that? I typed back 2 words. Watch payments. I didn't go home. I went to my lawyer's office. She had coffee waiting and the good kind of silence. I opened my bag, pulled out a manila folder labeled Lease Agreement V3, and slid it across the desk. Inside were documents the company never read, never questioned, and never understood. Because while Linda was busy updating her Facebook status to CEO vibes, I was quietly embedding myself into every square foot of that building like termite DNA. And when I stood in that break room, half the staff still wiping syrup off their chins, I knew exactly what I was doing. Because Stone Lake Holdings LLC, that wasn't some random landlord. It was mine. I didn't rush. That's what got to them. Not the lease bomb I'd dropped in the middle of Pancake Day. Not even the badge I left behind like it was a poker chip in a losing hand. But the pace. I moved like a woman folding laundry. Calm. Controlled. Like I had all the time in the world, and the kind of secrets you don't Google. My office, well, it used to be a closet before I remodeled it, was at the end of the hall near the busted printer no one wanted to admit was leased at triple fair market value. Fitting, really. I opened the door. The place still smelled like lemon pledge and failed promotions. Security trailed behind me, the 2 rookies they sent for optics, probably told to make sure she doesn't take a stapler. One leaned in to speak but changed his mind when I turned and met his eyes. It's a special kind of stare you get after 19 years of working under 6 CEOs, 2 hostile takeovers, and 1 Christmas party where the VP of sales tried to expense a stripper named Lorraine. I opened my top drawer. Empty, except 1 folder. Yellow tab. Labeled in my handwriting, Lease Agreement V3. I placed it on top of the box I didn't even need to fill, took my mug, world's okayest manager, and left the rest. They could keep the broken mouse and the dying succulent. What I left behind wasn't made of plastic and soil. On my way out, I passed Kyle from IT, who mouthed, "What was that?" like I'd just detonated something. And in a way, I had. My phone buzzed. Text from Jenna in accounting. Jenna. What was that? I replied. Watch the payments. No emojis, no kissy face, just instructions. Because that's what this was. Not an exit, a handoff. A silent pass to the next poor soul still stuck in the bureaucracy blender, trying to keep their head while Linda ran around calling herself Madam CEO like she was playing corporate cosplay. But here's the thing people forget about office managers. We see everything. Who signs what? Who skips the meetings? Who's screwing who in the third-floor utility closet? And more importantly, who reads the leases? Which, in this case, was no one. Flashback to 11 months ago. 11 months. I'm in the back corner of a conference room, AC vent blowing directly onto my neck while the founder skims a lease renewal for our new satellite office. Except it's not a renewal. It's a brand new lease. Different terms, new routing instructions, and the firm representing the landlord? Some boutique legal team I'd never heard of. I ask who vetted it. The reply? Oh, legal's busy. Just push it through. Push it through. Like we were ordering throw pillows from Wayfair, not locking into a quarterly auto-renewed lease at 4.6% escalation. That's the day I opened a new file on my home laptop. That's the day I called a lawyer friend from my HOA board and said, hey, walk me through Delaware LLC registration. Because if no one was going to read the fine print, someone might as well write it. That folder, Lease Agreement V3, contained the last 3 property agreements I'd shepherded through under Stone Lake Holdings LLC, the silent landlord in the shadows. Set up under a trust blind P.O. box, paper trail scrubbed with the kind of finesse that only comes from watching executives forge signatures on annual reports while mislabeling CapEx as OPEX. They thought they'd installed a puppet, but I'd been building a kingdom. Quietly, legally, brick by brick, clause by clause. And now? Now Linda had fired the one person who could have helped her understand what she'd just done. I could already picture the frantic Slack messages, the calls to legal, the CFO sweating bullets in his Herman Miller chair asking why all the rent payments had been going to some holding company they didn't recognize. They'd find out soon enough. I stepped into the elevator. One of the security guys cleared his throat like he wanted to say something. I didn't give him the chance. Just hit the button for the lobby and watched the doors close. Let them keep the stapler. I had the deed. By 10:24 a.m., Linda was pacing the boardroom like a raccoon with a flashlight up its ass. Somewhere between firing me and finishing her lukewarm decaf, she'd decided she wanted access to everything Teresa touched, which, spoiler alert, was about 93% of the company's operational backbone. It had pulled her into the conference room and hooked up a laptop, trying every admin credential they could scrounge from the dusty corners of Active Directory. Nothing worked. No access to the facility's dashboard. No access to lease archives. The project tracker was password protected behind a firewall with 2-factor authentication she couldn't begin to spell, let alone bypass. The interns tried guessing my old passwords. Teresa 123, let mine, password. Like I hadn't survived 5 phishing audits and a CFO who once typed his credentials into a fake PayPal invoice. I was many things. Stupid wasn't one of them. Linda snapped at Kyle from IT. Just overwrite it. Kyle, who had the social fortitude of a damp Triscuit, stammered, it's linked to her YubiKey and physical authentication, and the backup goes to her work cell, which is now deactivated and, Linda cut him off with a flick of her fingers like she was dismissing a waiter who'd brought the wrong Chardonnay. Forget it. Call legal. Legal, a 4-person team of glorified compliance parrots, came back with the first domino. They couldn't find the most recent lease. Not in the shared drive. Not in the cloud folders. Not even in the 3-ring binder some intern had been tasked with updating and never did, because he thought leasing was leasing software, and spent 6 weeks logging Adobe licenses into Excel. So they dug deeper, scanned the finance logs, printed vendor reports, ran payment histories. That's when Alex, the junior finance guy who still wore pleated khakis like his mom laid them out, spotted something. He said, adjusting his glasses. These last 4 quarterly payments, they didn't go to Sandridge Properties. Linda looked up. What? They went to a firm called Stone Lake Holdings LLC, he said, blinking like he hoped someone else would chime in and say, oh yeah, that's the founder's golf buddies company. All good here. But no one did, because no one had ever heard of it. He pushed a printed invoice forward. There it was. Stone Lake Holdings LLC. Remittance address in Delaware. Account ending in 0849. Signed electronically by a now-retired CFO and time-stamped with a digital signature traceable to, you guessed it, yours truly. Linda waved a dismissive hand. It's just a payment processor. Call the building. They'll clear it up. So they did. First call, went to voicemail. Second call, disconnected. Third call, answered, but the building manager, Richard, said 6 words that made the blood drain from Linda's face like someone flushed her Botox with battery acid. I can only speak to Teresa. That was it. No greeting. No explanation. Just that. And then he hung up. Linda stood frozen, lips twitching like a half-loaded Snapchat filter. One of the board members, Jim, who usually only chimed in when the coffee ran out, leaned forward and asked the obvious. Wait, who's on the lease? The room went quiet. Kyle typed furiously, trying to pull the original signed lease from the vault folder. The document surfaced with a trail that led to, surprise again, Stone Lake Holdings LLC, listed as intermediary lessor, with Sandridge merely noted as the primary owner of record. And on the final page, signature authority listed under T. Caldwell, managing partner. No one knew who T. Caldwell was, but HR's system still had my full name listed, Teresa Marie Caldwell. Linda blinked. That could be anyone. Alex printed the business registry from Delaware. T. Caldwell matched the digital signature's initials. The email attached, a masked alias routed through a domain I'd registered 3 years ago for a fake real estate consultancy used exclusively to route secure contracts. At that point, it wasn't a question of if they'd screwed up. It was just how bad. By 11:30, legal had called the founder in Europe. The CFO was sweating through his undershirt. And Linda? Linda was sitting alone at the end of the table, phone in hand, fingers hovering over the screen like she was considering dialing me. But pride's a hell of a drug, and she wasn't ready to detox. The boardroom that once echoed with plans for expansion now sounded like a church after someone farted mid-sermon, silent, stunned, and waiting for someone else to take the blame. They fired me thinking they'd cut a loose thread. They were about to find out I was the seam. The CFO hadn't blinked this much since the Q4 earnings call when the founder accidentally said bankruptcy adjacent instead of strategic restructuring. Now, standing over a scattershot of manila folders and spreadsheets, his eyes kept darting between payment logs and the kind of lease nobody in that room had ever actually read. Because here's the punchline. They had signed it. The lease reroute wasn't forged, wasn't slipped in with sleight of hand or laced with invisible ink. It had been emailed, printed, signed, countersigned, and blessed by the very man who used to remind me weekly to order more K-Cups. The previous CEO, Frank, had signed off on the updated facilities agreement a week before retiring to Florida, where he now plays pickleball and probably has no idea he gave me the keys to the kingdom. The CFO circled the payment terms with a red pen like he was prepping for a deposition. The lease stated that rent was to be paid quarterly to Stone Lake Holdings LLC, acting as intermediary landlord per the rights outlined in Exhibit B, language that looked just legal enough to skip a second glance. The escalation clause was there, the renewal clause was there, and tucked neatly in a footnote no one had ever questioned was the key phrase. Any and all notices to the intermediary shall be directed to the authorized representative listed in Appendix G. Guess who Appendix G pointed to? Email alias tcgohighlandops.com. That's when it clicked. Highland Ops had been my personal domain, registered 5 years ago. A fake consulting front I built for just such a contingency. Sounded generic, harmless, maybe even helpful. I used it for dummy calendar invites, test emails, and one very entertaining experiment involving a fake RFP that tricked 3 vendors into offering me a free lunch. They weren't looking at fraud. They were staring at foresight. I hadn't snuck behind their backs. I'd built a door in plain sight and dared them to ignore it. And they had. Meanwhile, Linda, red-faced and blinking like someone swapped her bifocals with a VR headset, kept muttering, "How was this approved? Who approved this?" over and over, as if chanting it might summon a scapegoat out of the Ethernet. Jim from the board finally asked the obvious. "Is it legal?" CFO swallowed hard. "Perfectly. It was vetted, signed, processed. Every payment is traceable. There's no fraud. It's just not ideal." Translation, bulletproof. That's when Kyle, sweating through his discount polo, whispered, "She played us." "No, Kyle. I outlasted you." Flashback 16 months earlier. I'm sitting at a diner just off Route 44, peeling the label off a bottle of iced tea while my lawyer, Marcy, scribbles on a legal pad. She's wearing knockoff Ray-Bans indoors and smells like cucumber lotion and tax code. We're the only two people in the place not in camo. You sure about this? She asks. I nod. I'm not getting fired for a third time by someone who calls Pinterest project management. She snorts. You want to do a clean shell or bury it in a trust? Both, I reply. I want it boring. Paper trail, but the dry kind. We set up Stone Lake Holdings LLC that day. Registered in Delaware, routed through a P.O. box in Newcastle. The EIN came through 2 days later. Bank account opened under a shell trust I'd been maintaining since my dad passed. He always said if you're going to get kicked in the teeth, at least wear steel-toe boots. Marcy handled the filings. I drafted the agreements. Clean, simple corporate poetry. No missteps, no wiggle room. The kind of language that could pass through 4 departments without a raised eyebrow, because I'd studied their blind spots. It was never about revenge. It was about insulation, protection, survival. Back in the boardroom, the silence grew pregnant and gave birth to panic. Legal confirmed that Stone Lake Holdings LLC had the sole authority to issue lease termination notices, raise rent, or deny access based on breach of contract. Linda stood, palms flat on the table, and said through gritted teeth, "Then we renegotiate. We strong-arm them." The CFO didn't even look up. "Ma'am, she is Stone Lake." And just like that, the dawning horror settled in. Not a scream, not a meltdown, just the slow, suffocating realization that they'd fired the one person whose name was carved into the walls they now couldn't legally enter. I hadn't burned the bridge. I bought the land under it. The call came in at 2:11 p.m. while I was finishing a cinnamon roll the size of a toddler's skull and watching traffic inch past my new office window. The line was blocked, but I picked up anyway, because when someone calls you 3 times in 5 minutes from a number that doesn't exist, it's never a Girl Scout with cookies. "Ms. Caldwell," the voice said, dry and clipped, like someone with a law degree and a caffeine deficiency. "We're reaching out from Goldstein, Meyer and Platt, representing your former employer." "Sure," I said, licking frosting off my thumb. "What can I do for you?" He hesitated, which already told me everything I needed to know. Lawyers don't hesitate unless they're trying to figure out how not to step in their own legal dogshit. "We're reviewing some recent documents regarding the lease agreement for your previous company headquarters. There appear to be inconsistencies. We'd appreciate your cooperation in clearing a few items up. Should be quick." "Inconsistencies," I repeated, leaning back in my chair. "You mean the kind where someone signs a lease without reading the terms, or the kind where a CEO's mom fires the landlord during breakfast?" He didn't laugh. That's the thing with corporate legal. No humor, no soul, and no real power unless someone upstairs gives them the go-ahead. And no one was giving the go-ahead now. They were calling because the grown-ups in the building told them to. He cleared his throat. "Some parties are interpreting these actions as potentially deceptive. There could be grounds for, hypothetically, pursuing charges under business fraud statutes, particularly if the intermediary relationship wasn't disclosed during execution." I smiled so hard my cheeks ached. "Right," I said. "You should probably read the indemnity clause in Section 6.2. Silence. Dead air, the kind that carries the weight of 20 unread documents, and one attorney who just realized he was talking to someone who'd done her homework. I waited. Finally, he said, "You're referring to the lease language?" "Yep, Section 6.2. It indemnifies the intermediary landlord from all liability arising from contract execution, so long as they are operating within the scope of the agreement, which I was. The clause was carried over from your firm's own boilerplate language. I highlighted it in the draft, actually, in yellow." More silence. "Now," I continued, "unless you're planning to accuse your own client of negligence for not reviewing a document your firm signed off on, I'd suggest you go back to your partners and reread the lease you let slide through, because Linda wanted to close the deal before her flight to Scottsdale." Click. He didn't say goodbye. Just vanished. 10 minutes later, a screenshot started circulating internally. Someone forwarded it to me, anonymously, from a Gmail address named OpsWhistle123. It was Section 6.2, underlined and circled in red, with a timestamp proving it had been in the document since day 1. "The intermediary lessor shall be held harmless and indemnified against all claims, actions, or losses arising from the tenant's execution of this lease, including but not limited to omissions in document review or misinterpretation of intermediary involvement." Translation. I could rent them space inside a flaming dumpster, and as long as I'd filed the paperwork correctly, they were on the hook for every scorched stapler. And I had filed it correctly. Every form, every clause. Notarized, indexed, and reviewed by my attorney, Marcy, who once litigated a parking dispute so thoroughly that the opposing party had to relocate to Missouri. There was no fraud, no deception, just negligence on their part and competence on mine. Back in the office, I poured myself another cup of coffee, still hot from the fancy new Keurig the old company wouldn't spring for, because expenses had to be justified. They were learning now what I'd known all along. The cost of undervaluing the woman who knows where the pipes are buried isn't a line item. It's a reckoning. And this was just the start. By Thursday morning, they were dragging ergonomic chairs down the sidewalk like a corporate refugee caravan, wheeling monitors across parking lots and handing out Google Maps printouts because the temporary space they scrambled to rent was 2 blocks over and lacked, among other things, air conditioning, working Wi-Fi, and enough power outlets to run the coffee machine and the server rack simultaneously. But hey, Linda wanted a leaner operation, right? Word was, they'd found a sublease on short notice. Some half-finished co-working space above a defunct kickboxing gym called Punch Life. They signed the agreement in a panic with a discount broker who thought wet signature meant don't spill coffee on the PDF. Only one problem. They didn't check the block's usage registry. And guess whose name came up first in the property management system? Teresa Marie Caldwell, under a different shell this time. Riverside Holdings, LLC. Registered 14 months prior, routed through a trust I set up in Utah during the everyone's doing crypto phase of executive stupidity. The building manager, a guy named Russell with a Bluetooth headset and zero tolerance for bullshit, flagged the access request the moment he saw the conflicting occupancy rights. Sorry, he told them flatly. We've got priority hold on that suite. Can't lease it to a conflicting entity. You'll need a release from the current rights holder. Who is the rights holder? Linda demanded, in front of 6 employees trying to set up desks on folding tables in the hallway. Russell tapped his iPad and shrugged. Says here, Teresa Caldwell. The sound Linda made wasn't quite human. Something between a cough and a scream, like her throat rejected the truth mid-swallow. She spun on the operations lead and barked, "She's blacklisting us." Staff looked up from their laptops, blinking like raccoons caught in fluorescent lighting. No one knew what to say. Kyle from IT tried to pretend he was troubleshooting a router when he was really just Googling, "Can you get sued for crying at work?" Linda, in full unraveling mode, started pacing the hallway, jabbing her finger toward the windows. "This is harassment. She's retaliating. I want a list of every property within 5 miles. I want to know who owns what, who leases what, and if she so much as sneezes near our next lease, I will sue her ass into the pavement." Problem is, I wasn't doing anything illegal. I wasn't even interfering. I'd just been prepared. Riverside Holdings LLC held priority lease rights on 3 properties in the area, including the one they tried to sneak into. My contracts were clean, and my name wasn't even publicly listed. You had to dig through 2 shell layers and a notarized trust document to even find my fingerprints. And still, they couldn't escape me. Linda's meltdown went viral internally. Someone filmed her shrieking beside the elevator bank and uploaded it to the company Slack with the caption, "When you realize you fired the infrastructure." It got 47 laughing reactions before the channel got archived by HR. At that point, the message was clear. They had 2 choices: pay the rent I'd demand, or send their executives to pitch $1-million clients from a WeWork with sticky floors and a broken elevator. The board called an emergency meeting later that afternoon. Not to plan. Not to pivot. To beg. I received the calendar invite while sipping a smoothie in my new office. Top floor, corner unit, panoramic windows, my name on the lease and the deed. They called it a negotiation. But I already knew what it really was. An admission. A surrender. A reckoning wrapped in a Zoom link. The emergency board meeting started with awkward throat clears and the sound of someone slamming a Keurig pod into a machine too aggressively. The founder had just returned from an extended health retreat in the Swiss Alps, which, if you knew the man, meant he was golfing, drinking Negronis, and hiding from operational chaos. He still had that sunburn meets Botox glow as he entered the room, latte in hand, completely unaware that the company he built had been hijacked by his mother's vanity and my paperwork. He took a seat at the head of the table like a prince returning to his court after exile. "What's the emergency?" No one answered right away. Then the CFO, sweating like a defrosted ham, cleared his throat and cued the AV guy to play the footage. There I was, On screen, standing at the end of a folding table next to a tray of discount mini muffins. Linda in full tyrant mode, barking at me like she was auditioning for a reboot of Succession filmed in a Holiday Inn Express. Shut up and hand over all company property. The founder squinted at the screen. Wait, that's Teresa? Kyle from IT nodded nervously. She was terminated during the team appreciation breakfast. The founder turned to Linda, who was sitting with her arms crossed, eyes locked on the wall like it owed her money. You fired Teresa? She was overhead. Redundant, Linda said without looking up. We didn't need a glorified secretary milking a legacy salary. She ran infrastructure, someone muttered. The founder blinked. And she just left? Badge on the table, Kyle whispered. Did she shout? Threaten anything? CFO shook his head. No, sir. She just asked why the lease payments were going to Stone Lake Holdings LLC. The founder leaned back in his chair, expression shifting from confusion to concern, then finally to dread. What the hell is Stone Lake Holdings? That's when the lawyer stepped in. Firm voice, no fluff. We investigated. The primary lease was restructured under an intermediary, Stone Lake Holdings LLC, fully registered, legally binding, executed with proper authorization by your office last year. Who owns Stone Lake? He asked. The lawyer hesitated, then passed over a printed packet. Teresa Caldwell. Through a series of holding companies and trusts, she has full landlord rights. We confirmed it with the property manager. The room fell into stunned silence. The only sound was the hum of the AC and someone coughing into a fist. Wait, said Julia from Strategic Growth, eyes wide. We fired our landlord? A murmur of disbelief circled the table. She's cut off our access to the new temp space, Kyle added, voice shaking. Her other shell has leasing rights on that block, too. I had to hold my meeting in the parking lot, Jim from sales blurted. A bird shat on my iPad. The founder looked like he'd swallowed a thumbtack. Why wasn't I notified? Linda finally spoke, voice brittle. It was a facilities issue. I didn't think it warranted board-level attention. You fired someone with full authority over our real estate portfolio, the founder said slowly, without even reading the lease. She was a threat, Linda snapped. Too much power consolidated. She ran everything like her personal domain. Because she was the only one who understood it, the lawyer replied, steepling his fingers. We've reviewed the lease. She holds the only rights of reentry. They're airtight. And unless we pay her or she voluntarily releases the clause, we are in breach. CFO piped in, voice barely above a whisper. Also, Section 7.4 says rent defaults trigger a personal guarantor clause, meaning the board could be held individually liable for certain penalties. Dead. Silence. The founder rubbed his temples. Jesus Christ, Mother. Linda said nothing. Then someone bold, someone tired, murmured, Maybe it's time we reconsider leadership, before she gets us blackballed from every lease in the Tri-County area. The founder looked around. No one objected. Even the intern, still technically unpaid, nodded slowly, like he'd just seen his whole college debt flash before his eyes. The meeting ended with no resolutions, no public vote. But when Linda stood up and left without a word, no one followed. They just watched her go. Her grip wasn't just slipping, it was gone. The offer came by courier. Not email, not phone call. An actual man in a suit with too much hair gel and a leather folio tucked under his arm like it held nuclear codes. My assistant, who used to be a receptionist at my old firm before they outsourced her job to an app, buzzed me and said, You're gonna want to see this. He introduced himself with a sheepish smile and handed me the envelope like it was about to explode. Inside, a formal proposal from the board. The tone was polite, almost reverent, like I was a priest and they were trying to confess through legalese. They wanted re-entry. Immediate. No hard feelings, of course. All water under the bridge. Just a simple renegotiation. They were prepared to triple the current lease rate and cover moving costs if I would consider permitting reoccupancy of the premises under mutually agreeable terms. I read it twice, folded it neatly, and looked up at the courier. Tell them it'll be retroactive, I said. 4 months. He blinked. Sorry? I'll allow re-entry, I repeated, but they're paying triple for the last 4 months, not just the next 12. The lease doesn't say, from the point of renegotiation. It says at landlord's discretion. And I'm feeling pretty damn discretionary today. He nodded slowly and left without argument. An hour later, my phone rang. This time, it was a board member. Julia, from Strategic Growth, the only one who ever brought her own pen to meetings. She sounded exhausted, like she'd been fielding calls from staff working in stairwells and janitor closets. "Teresa," she started, "please, there has to be another way. The retroactive clause. It'll wipe out our reserves." "Should have read the lease," I said flatly, sipping coffee from a mug that read, "In charge, since always." "Be reasonable," she whispered, voice tight with desperation. "We'll pay double. Not retroactive. Just help us stay open." I swiveled in my chair and looked out the window. Downtown buzzed beneath me, and in the glass I caught my own reflection. Calm, composed, and finally unshackled. A flashback rolled through me like a bruise waking up. 3 years ago, the COO position opened. Twice. I was promised a review. Instead, they brought in Vince. Vince with the bad tie knots and worse ideas. Vince who thought HR fell under snacks and morale. Vince who once asked me if leases were the same as rentals, just with fancier fonts. Vince lasted 5 months. They didn't call me then, either. 6 months after that, a new search began. I sat on the panel, scored highest in every internal evaluation, wrote the damn onboarding plan for whoever got the job. Did I get it? No. They gave it to Chad. And when Chad fell apart after embezzling conference funds to finance a pyramid scheme involving alpaca meat, they froze the position until further notice. Until Linda arrived. She didn't even ask if I wanted the role, just assumed I'd keep the wheels turning like always while she played CEO Barbie and scrawled vision statements in glitter ink. Now they needed me. And I wasn't angry. I wasn't even smug. I was done being overlooked. "You want the space?" I told Julia. "You'll pay 4 months retroactive at triple rate, plus 8% interest, plus legal review fees, plus a $25,000 goodwill reinstatement." "That's extortion," she breathed. "No," I said. "It's the market correcting itself." Silence. Then, "We'll wire the funds today." "Great. Have your people coordinate with my lawyer. She's on a ski trip in Aspen, but her assistant is a demon with DocuSign." I hung up and leaned back in my chair, breathing in the quiet. Not revenge. Not yet. But the terms were mine. And Linda? She hadn't called, hadn't written, which was good, because she was the final clause. And I wasn't done rewriting it. The carpet was new, thick, silent. The kind of carpet you put down when you're rich enough not to care if anyone spills on it because you already own the floor beneath it. I walked into the conference room at 10:03 a.m. sharp, my conference room now, wearing a blazer I used to save for annual reviews, back when I thought corporate respect was something you earned. Turns out, you just have to own the building they disrespected you in. The board was already seated, every face pulled tight with that nervous, sweaty sheen you only see during layoffs and SEC audits. The founder sat at the head, looking 10 years older than he did on the company's glossy about page. His mother, Linda, was beside him, arms crossed, jaw set like stone, eyes flicking around the room like she could find an exit strategy in the light fixtures. I didn't speak at first. Just placed a thick document folder on the table, pulled a pen from my pocket, and clicked it once. That sound echoed like a gun cocking. "This is the revised lease," I said, tapping the folder. No one moved. "The rate remains triple. Retroactive terms stand. Interest rates locked. You'll retain occupancy with full utilities and operational privileges, but..." I flipped to the signature page and slid it forward. "There's one clause that's non-negotiable." Linda sat up straighter. I turned to the founder. "I'm not leasing to her." He blinked. "Excuse me?" "You can have the space," I said, calm as iced bourbon. "You can even keep the custom wiring, the HVAC install I personally oversaw, the conference room tables that I built the vendor relationships for. Hell, I'll even throw in the reserved parking spots. But she doesn't get to set foot in this building again." Linda opened her mouth like she was about to bark something sharp, but I cut her off with a single raised finger. "I don't rent to people who scream across tables. I don't rent to people who call my career bloated overhead. And I especially don't rent to people who think firing the infrastructure is a smart leadership move." The founder looked down at the contract, then at his mother, then at the board. No one said a word. And then Jim, God bless Jim from sales, murmured. She's right, Julia followed. We can't keep bleeding money and credibility. Kyle from IT, still chewing the inside of his cheek, just nodded. The founder sighed. Can she stay on in a remote role, consultant? No, I said. She goes, or your company goes. That was the moment. That slow, suffocating pivot when power shifts and people realize they're sitting on the wrong side of the blast radius. The founder didn't argue. He simply turned to Linda and said, voice like wet gravel, it's time. She stared at him like he'd betrayed her at the Last Supper. Then she stood, slowly, smoothed her blouse, and walked out without looking back. I laid the pen on the table. I'll wait in the lobby. Send someone out when it's signed. 10 minutes later, it was done. No handshake, no closure speech. Just the sound of shuffling papers and the weight of a bad empire collapsing under the gravity of its own ignorance. I left the building, my building, with the revised lease in one hand and the office keys in the other. The badge they deactivated after firing me, still dead. I never reactivated it. Let the new COO request a fob like everyone else. At 11:59 a.m., Marcy texted me a screenshot. Wire confirmed. The first tripled rent payment. Clean, cleared, deposited. I didn't smile, but I did order lunch from the sushi place they used to say was too expensive for admin staff. I ate it alone, at the head of a reclaimed conference table, and not one damn soul told me where to sit.